Hello, I'm Toynia Edmond-Moore, and this is my presentation on the church and its tax exemption. Together, we gather to consider a topic that intertwines faith and law: church tax exemption in the United States. The Bible reminds us in Romans 13:1 to be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. This relationship between church and government is complex, and in the United States, it has led to the evolution of church tax exemption under 501c3 status. Our nation's history reflects this complexity. Since the colonial era, American churches have been tax exempt, recognizing their role as providers of moral and social welfare. This status was solidified in 1894, exempting churches from federal income taxes. But it was the Revenue Act of 1954 that established the formal 501c3 designation that we recognize today. This law created a standard exempting religious, charitable, and educational organizations, churches included, from tax obligations as long as they refrain from political campaigns and limiting lobbying activities. The Johnson Amendment, part of this act, restricted political endorsements from tax-exempt organizations to maintain the separation of church and state. This unique status allows churches to operate freely without filing for tax exemption formally like other nonprofits. Many people see this as essential as churches offer services, homeless shelters, food banks, and family assistance that benefit the wider public. This support aligns with the teachings of Christ, who, in Matthew 25:35-36, urges us to feed the hungry and care for the needy. However, critics argue that automatic tax exemption for churches may challenge the very separation of church and state that it aims to uphold. Jacobson, Jarvis, and Company comments that on one hand, proponents of keeping churches tax-free argue that exemption upholds the separation of church and state because some churches contribute to the public good through charitable acts and social services. Like I said before, after-school programs, family assistance, housing, they earn their tax exemption. Many people believe smaller churches and their services would struggle to survive if they lost their tax exemption. However, opponents argue that this exemption violates the same church and state separation. They note this financial benefit implies the U.S. government supports religion and gives special treatment to religious organizations. However, instances of political misuse of tax exemption has fueled further debate. In recent years, revelations about financial abuses within religious organizations have drawn attention. For example, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has reported to have accumulated $100 billion intended for charity. They had scandals involving the COVID-19 relief funds, and other misuses have brought to question some tax-exempt privileges granted to all religious organizations, regardless of size or public good. Robert Rapino also comments, in 2019, a whistleblower reported that the Church of Scientology's revenue and investments are so notorious that even former President Donald Trump questioned the legitimacy of its tax exemption status. There are numerous examples of religious institutions abusing funds that arguably should have never been available to them in the first place. This includes the Catholic Church scandals, from settlements being paid out to victims of child abuse, and even a pair of nuns embezzling $835,000 and gambling it away in Las Vegas. A reason enough to consider revising the tax-exempt laws in the United States. Some leaders have even gone into, endorsing politicians and, things like that 501c3s aren't supposed to do. Like Pastor Burden in Texas, who commented in a sermon in May of 2021 that, I got a candidate that God wants to win. I got a mayor that God wants to unseat. God wants to undo. God wants to shift the balance of power in our city. And I have jurisdiction over that this morning. Encouraging people to, go and vote for, I'm assuming, the person that, was in support of what he says, gun rights and a ban on abortion. What Burden said that day in May 2021 was a violation of a long-standing federal law barring churches and nonprofits from directly or indirectly participating in political campaigns. Some would even say that Liberty University has done the same thing with former President Donald Trump, inviting him to, church services and, events or whatever at Liberty University, who is a 501c3 and also has a church. Like, it, the not lobbying and not campaigning thing seems to be a very gray area for 501c3 nonprofits in general, let alone religious organizations. In my opinion, I just believe that that the church just needs to focus on helping the needy and, feeding the hungry. Like, it's unfortunate that, a lot of these smaller churches that are struggling to keep their doors open when there's churches that, have private jets. I don't know how private jets are helping feed the hungry or, care for the needy at all. I just think that if it's going to be tax exempt, there needs to be proof and regulation that the money is actually helping, that the money is being used to be charitable and not to, line the pockets of people that want to live in mansions and drive in private jets. I also think that some of these churches have tax exemption. They've been known to be extremists and to, abuse people and, things like that. There's been documentaries on Scientologists. There's been documentaries on Jehovah's Witnesses. Like, there's churches that are using this money and this power to not do God's work at all and to actually abuse people. That's not of Christ. That's not, loving the church as we love ourselves at all. So I definitely believe that there should be some guidelines and some regulation with the tax exemption for sure. And that is my presentation.